Hey, movie fans, how are you? It's Demetri Panos here, part of HCA's brand new show called Retro Rewind. Rewind with Demetri Panos. This is actually Retro Rewind uh, version 1.2. A few weeks back, I talked about Jaws. And it's give it a good 45th birthday and to compare it to COVID. So now we're going to be doing something new. And the whole purpose of Retro Rewind is to refamiliarize an audience or actually just familiarize an audience, inspire you to rewatch an old movie, or if you've never seen it, well, go back and watch it again. So, that is the whole purpose of Retro Rewind. I am pulling movies out of my own library, my Blu-ray library, and trying to find some relevancy to it to today, but also because, in my humble opinion, they're really good movies and they're worth a Retro Rewind. And again, if you've never seen the movie, it's worth to seek it out and go take a look. And that's what I hope to inspire with Retro Rewind, presented by the Hollywood Critics Association, that I'm proud to be a part of. So today's movie, well, it shares, it's a genre kind of a movie, because throughout cinema history, there's been lots of movies about movies about Hollywood and the making of movies. Sullivan's Travels, Singing in the Rain, The Player, Tropic Thunder, Hugo, Argo, just to name a few. So today I'm going to be talking about one such film. It's a very underrated and it's a rarely talked about movie, and that movie is Blake Edwards S.O.B. So just to do a quick recap of Blake Edwards, who had a stunning, just great, fascinating career and career trajectory. Most people know Blake Edwards from the Pink Panther series. He also did Breakfast at Tiffany's, Days of Wine and Roses, The Great Race, 10, and Victoria. He also introduced moviegoers to Bruce Willis in the slapstick comedy Blind Date, which also starred John Larroquette and Kim Basinger. It's a very funny film. I think it's as funny today as it was back then. Very slapsticky romantic comedy, but it works. So that is what I'm going to be talking today, specifically though, about S.O.B. Blake Edwards S.O.B. was released by Paramount Pictures July 1st, 1981. It was Edwards' 25th film, and it sported quite the cast. William Holden in what was sadly going to be his last film. The Music Man himself, Robert Preston. Robert Vaughn, Shelley Winters, an extraordinarily young and beautiful Rosanna Arquette, Richard Mulligan of Soap and Empty Nest fame, Robert Loggia, who was a Blake Edwards favorite. You could see him popping up in various of Blake Edwards movies, as well as Robert Webber. And of course, the movie starred Julie Andrews, who was Edwards' wife, and whose character, she's an actress by the name of Sally Miles, was Andrews' most revealing role. More on that in just a bit. Being that S.O.B. isn't in the echelon of the movies that I had mentioned before, but worth viewing nonetheless, I'm going to give a little bit of the plot, tell you what it's about. But in this particular time and podcast, I'm not going to reveal any major spoilers. For those of you who have never watched S.O.B., I want you to try to go in as fresh as possible. So I won't try not to ruin any major plot points of the film, okay? So for me, S.O.B. is a very sharp, scathing satire of the studio system and how movies were made. Richard Mulligan plays Felix Farmer. He is one of Hollywood's most successful movie producers of the time. That is, until he produces Hollywood's greatest flop of the time, the movie called Night Wind. Night Wind breaks wind at the box office, reads one trade headline, proving the old Hollywood adage, you're only as good as your last picture. Felix Farmer goes from being the toast of the town to just being plain toast. Things are so bad. The studio hates him. His actress wife, Sally Miles, she leaves him. And Felix sees no other option but to commit suicide and end his life, which, like Night Wind, he fails miserably and actually comedically at. So good thing for Felix, though, he has his best friends. They are Night Wind's director, Tim Cully, who is brilliantly played by Holden. I'll talk more about him a little later. His personal physician, Dr. Irvin Feingarten, played with a razor wit by music man, as I said, Robert Preston. Ben Coogan, who is Sally's press agent, is also one of his best friends, and he too he's played by Robert Webber, another Blake Edwards favorite. In fact, he had starred in Edwards' film just prior to SOB 10, and he's also been in other various films. So, and they are Felix's best friends. So, with Farmer laid out by one of Feingarten's great little injectable cocktails, his buddies figure out the best way to cheer Felix up would be to have a huge party. It's actually more like an orgy at Felix's house. All the while, producer and president of Capitol Studios, David Blackman, played with a Robert Evanesque nuance by Robert Vaughn, is looking for Felix's head on a platter. Felix blurrily awakens during the height of the orgy in his house, and as he stumbles and actually falls through one of his floors, looking for another means to end his life, he has an epiphany and he realizes why Night Wind failed. As part of Felix's pitch, he goes on to say, we gave them virtue, they want vice, they being the audience. We sold them schmaltz, they prefer sadomasochism. And instead of the American dream, it should have been the American wet dream. Yes, SOB is rated R for good reason. Felix has a further plan, and that is to buy the movie back from the studio, reshoot it, replacing innocence with salaciousness, and have America's princess, Sally Miles, go topless. With all the principals in agreement, Felix goes on to reshoot Night Wind. And the word on the street is the movie is going to be a hit, perhaps Hollywood's biggest hit for the time. And Capitol Studios, knowing and hearing all about this, they scheme a way to try and steal the movie rights back from Felix. And then Sally Miles is beginning to have her second thoughts about, well, flashing her boobies on screen. It's just another day in Hollywood, folks. So SOB teeters from historical farce and slapstick. And I have to say, slapstick today, it's a lost art. To Edwards' credit, he made a career on slapstick. It's usually in most of all of his movies. And there's a finesse when it comes to slapstick comedy. It's a dance. It's a choreograph. It's how do you make it work? If you've ever watched the Pink Panther films, like I said, his most notable, they relied on a physical comedy that is rarely done today. There is a precision, there is a timing, knowing what works, what doesn't. And today's directors, to be honest, I don't think they'll put in the time to have something like that work. Also, I don't think there are many actors or actresses who could pull it off. Again, when you were working with the likes of a Peter Sellers, who could pull off most anything, you're already ahead of the game. But today, to do that kind of physical comedy, where it is actually for a specific scene, just physical comedy, and people flailing around and bumping into things and destroying property, that doesn't really, maybe it's seen its time. I don't know. That could be a conversation for another time. But I believe that it is a lost art form. And I think in today's world, silliness, dopiness is not necessarily a bad thing. And when I talked about cast in SOB, you had a great cast. And you had the likes of Richard Mulligan, whose elasticity in face and body, they were the perfect tools for Edwards to play with. You couple that with pratfalls and a sizzling, gut-busting dialogue, they were the perfect cast to pull this all off. And SOB becomes a blistering satire through and through. So if you've never watched SOB, if you go back to rewatch it, it could seem as if it's somewhat real, what's happening to Felix Farmer. And that is because, in a sense, it kind of is real. Edwards' experience with studios was at the time not too dissimilar with what Farmer was going through and had to deal with. Edwards wrote SOB, loosely basing it off of his own experiences where studios took control of his movies, edited those movies without his input, and released what became failures at the time. The movies, in case you're interested, were Darling Lily, which starred Julie Andrews, Wild Rovers, a Western which starred William Holden. As an aside, Wild Rovers is actually a really pretty good flick. You can find it on TCM every now and then. I would look for it, especially if you like Westerns. You'll see a great performance by William Holden. And again, it's really one of Blake Edwards' lesser known films, but it's really good. And the third movie was called The Carrie Treatment. Now, Blake Edwards' screenplay for SOB was a bit ahead of its time. Sex became very commonplace, even obligatory in movies of the 80s into the 90s. In fact, you could probably point to Blake Edwards as pioneering that wave, because just a year before, he released a great success, 10, which was a slapstick sex romp about a man grappling with middle-aged crazy. So while Edwards' instincts were on point, audiences weren't quite ready for what SOB was going to show. Now, I'm going to put this in perspective for you. At that time, very late 70s and into the early 80s, Julie Andrews was really trying to shed her sweet innocence from her earlier roles as from Sound of Music and Mary Poppins. Not that she disdained those roles. She loved them very much, but she wanted to be taken as a serious actress, and show that she could be in more mature roles other than the sweet characters she portrayed in the past. So Edwards, being her loving husband, they made what I call the Andrews trilogy. They made 10, SOB, the second one, and then the very funny Victor Victoria. And after those 3 movies, audiences did, in fact, take Julie Andrews quite seriously as an actress. And she was able to keep her Mary Poppins Sound of Music persona. But now Hollywood could see her as a very talented actress who could do drama and comedy very well and succinctly. So, but however, at the time of the release in 1981, audiences weren't quite ready for SOB and seeing Mary Poppins out, so to speak. Once word of that happening got out, and mind you, it was in the trailer. So if you think that trailers give too much away today, that's something that's been going on for quite some time now. And the trailer basically said that was what's going to happen in the movie. And that's what everybody focused on regarding the release of SOB. And the movie became titular instead of being a comedy, and a comedy about movie making. The great irony of it all is what should have sold the movie and made it a hit ended up working against it. Audiences didn't want to see Julie Andrews in that way. To quote a great line from her publicist, played by the great Shelley Winters, she says of Sally Miles' character, some of her fans still don't think she goes to the bathroom. And that of the day is pretty much what many people felt about the sweet and innocent Julie Andrews. And it also didn't help that some weeks, that literally a week before, you had movies in the box office or in theaters that were doing pretty well already. And SOB was just taking up some, it was taking up some extra screens. And what did you have? You had movies like Stripes, Bill Murray. You had James Bond, For Your Eyes Only. You had The Great Muppet Caper as well, and Dragon Slayer. And in the few weeks after the release of SOB, you had movies like Escape from New York, Endless Love, and Arthur, with Dudley Moore, who had just been made a mega Hollywood superstar in the year before as Blake Edwards 10. So that, along with Julie Andrews and audiences not willing to or not ready to show Julie Andrews bearing all, so to speak, all of those factors have made SOB not quite the success that they had hoped to get with the previous release of 10. So regarding the movie's title, SOB, you may think that it stands for son of a bitch, and why wouldn't you? That's what it stands in layman's terms. But we'd all be wrong. In the movie's context, it stands for Hollywood's standard operational bullshit. Hence, the bull sitting in a director's chair with a film can. We don't have those anymore, sad to say, as the director of a movie. So for some added trivia to the title of the movie, SOB, Blake Edwards himself, he actually had his name taken off the writing credits for a movie. It was a movie which starred Clint Eastwood and Burt Reynolds. The movie was called City Heat. Blake Edwards' pseudonym for that movie was Sam O. Brown, or SOB. I would say that today's SOB stands the test of time. It's even relevant to today's movie making world. Can you say the Snyder Cut? Think about that, folks. A movie that, well, in Hollywood's eyes, in the bean counters of Hollywood's eyes, they feel that Justice League was not a success. And now they've allowed the movie to be recut and to be re-released, albeit it's going to be on HBO Max. Regardless, the similarities are actually quite profound, being that I just recently watched SOB and I found that very funny. The slapstick in SOB, I feel, will seem fresh because it's just not done. Yes, it's zany. Yes, you could say it's stupid. But in today's world, that's kind of needed. And since we don't see it, perhaps you'll relook at SOB and view it more as an art form. I mean, it was Blake Edwards' staple. If you've never seen SOB, hopefully you will see it as the farce that it is and the satire for making fun of Hollywood. The unabashed lampooning and harpooning of studio execs and gossip columns is hysterically trenchant. And I have to say, one would also have to marvel at what would sadly be William Holden's last film. The man had done so many types of movies, but I can honestly say that he had comedic chops and he could deliver a monologue like no one's business and make it resonant and make you laugh. And in fact, I would even go further to say that certain monologues that William Holden's character had to say were written not just for Cully, but they were actually really about William Holden himself. So also, I would also say that Julie Andrews, she was literally all in on this rated R escapade. There's a scene in the movie where Sally Miles goes under the influence of one of Dr. Feingarten's cocktails, and Andrews, the actress Andrews, under the guidance and the comfort of her husband, she literally lets loose as a that the Hills were still alive. So I urge you folks, go seek out Blake Edwards S.O.B. to rewatch it or to watch it for the first time. I know that it's available on Blu-ray. You could probably find it on YouTube. That's what my friend Phil does. He watches a lot of movies he purchases from YouTube. But I would seriously seek this because his next movie, Victor Victoria, I think is as near perfect as a comedy as you can get. So go seek out SOB. I think you'll enjoy it. You can write in the comments to me about it and see what you thought. And believe me, trust me, I'm not selling you any standard operational bullshit. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode. I really do thank you for staying with me, listening, watching. I also have to give a huge shout out to Hollywood Critics Association, HCA. And what an honor for me it is to be a part of the group throughout this entire pandemic, through the quarantine, through the riots, or I should say the protests. Black Lives Matter. Hollywood Critics Association has been there. We've done trivia-thons to help support those in need during the quarantine. We've raised monies for Black Lives Matters campaigns. The striving for diversity is evident in what Hollywood Critics Association stands for. So I wanted to give a big shout out to HCA and to all of its members for being supportive throughout this entire tough time. Also, a shout out to HCA founders, Scott Menzel and his wonderful wife, Ashley Menzel, and particular kudos to Scott for helping set this show up, for doing the graphics, working things out together with me. I could never do this without the tutelage and help of Scott Menzel, so thank you to him. And most importantly, thank you to you, the movie-loving audience. If at the end of the day we end up just talking movies together, whether we like or dislike, but we come to some happy medium, I love that. And hopefully I can inspire you to rewatch something or maybe see something you never even heard of. That would be great too. So in the upcoming weeks, I hope to do something of a tribute to Carl Reiner. And we've got so many anniversary releases of movies just within this past month alone. Try to get to some of those as well. Again, thank you very much for tuning in. I appreciate your kindness and your attention. You have other things that you could be doing, but you chose to listen to me or to watch me, and that means a lot. So take care until next time. For Retro Rewind, this is Demetri Panos of HCA signing off. Thank you.